3-part series focused on mentoring system-involved youth. Today's webinar, Incorporating Developmental and Positive Psychology into Mentoring Approaches, is brought to you by the Governor's Prevention Partnership in Wethersfield, Connecticut. The Governor's Prevention Partnership heads the Connecticut Mentoring Partnership and focuses on building quality-based mentoring throughout the state. Today's main presenter is Dr. Jarjoura, Principal Researcher at the American Institutes for Research. Dr. Jarjoura has over 16 years of experience in developing and evaluating mentoring programs. He designed and evaluated a randomized control study that examined the impact of mentoring as a component of a juvenile reentry initiative and subsequently served as the director of a statewide expansion of the model in Indiana. We are pleased to have Dr. Jarjoura as a feature presenter in this webinar series. Let's just get a few housekeeping items out of the way before starting. All attendees connecting through your computer are muted for this webinar. If you are calling in, please make sure that you have your phone muted. If you have any questions during the webinar, type your questions or comments into the chat box. Hannah Granville will respond privately for technical questions, or if a general question or comment, post to the chat board so that everyone can view it. If you question for a presenter, question during the question and answer period at the end of the session. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jarjoura and start the webinar.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. So today, the topic is incorporating developmental and positive psychology into mentoring approaches. So I think what you can expect to get out of today's webinar, we're going to hopefully increase your understanding of adolescent development. Think about how what we do in mentoring, how that fits within the context of adolescent development, normal and for kids who've had some issues along the way, including trauma. So we'll talk about how trauma affects the developmental process, and for you to keep that in mind as you think about how do we prepare our mentors. And then we're going to look at ways that your program can provide more developmentally appropriate support. So that's our agenda here. And so I'm going to start with an overview of adolescent development. Some of this stuff you're going to already be familiar with, so it'll just perhaps be a reminder and help you think about how to fit what we do in mentoring into that context. When we think about adolescent development, when we think about what are the things that adolescents need to accomplish as they're making their way through adolescence, it includes all of these things, right? So they, in order to make a living, make a positive, pro-social living in our society, they have to be good at something that they can get paid to do. So that's really about their competency and thinking about how what we do helps prepare them to have skills, have talents that they can bring to a career. So that's the competency area. Also, it's about life skills, right? So how to budget their money, how to go shopping for groceries, how to do their laundry, how to live independently. Those are all included in how to use transportation systems, right? That's all part of life skills, and those are things that are useful to think about, because you don't have to have a degree to teach somebody life skills, and that's a great way that mentors can bring some of their own experiences to what they're doing with the young people. We really, if we think about all adolescents in our society, right? Everybody's goal is to become a productive member of our society as adults, and so that really is focusing more on being, the positive development, right? So taking their strengths and building from that, which is not the natural way that we work with kids in many of our youth-serving systems. We oftentimes look at what the problems are and what's missing, and we try to help fill those in. But if we can change that focus and build from their strengths and be more focused on positive, that's really where the evidence suggests we can make a bigger difference. It also includes all those things that get loosely grouped into what we call emotional intelligence, right? The interpersonal skills, how to read social situations, how to get along with others, how to work together in teams. Those are all things that are important, and those are things that are going to help them be successful in all their relationships and in employment. And then really it's about accountability, right? When we're talking about kids that have gotten into trouble, they're part of the juvenile justice system, accountability is already a factor here, right? So how they can think about, I'm going to say a little bit more about accountability in a few minutes here. And then finally, the way that they make decisions and how they solve problems, right? Those are very important life skills. And things that we develop over time through trial and error, and sometimes by watching other people who are good at that too. So thinking about how we can do both of those is going to be important. So let's agree on a few things that we know about adolescent development for normal. Just your average kids. What do we know? We know that they tend to be impulsive, but impulsivity can decline with age, right? As people get older, they spend more time thinking before they act. We just know that that's true. We know that they're involved in sensation seeking, declines with age. Just over time, they start to be more careful. They start to be less driven by looking for ways to experience, more able to think about the consequences of their action, right? Think about how what I'm doing right now has an impact on what I'm trying to accomplish in the future. And we do know that as they get older, they become more resistant to what we call peer pressure, right? So the influence of their peers. And that just happens naturally as kids get older. But when kids experience trauma during childhood, and many of the young people that you work with, that's going to be true for them. When they experience trauma during childhood, then we know that many of those kids experience delays in some of the developmental milestones. And so you'll look at them and think of them as being immature, right? They're not where other kids the same age are in terms of the way, the milestones that they're achieving developmentally. We often find higher rates of learning disabilities among kids who've experienced trauma during childhood, and that complicates some of the way that they experience interpersonal relationships, the way that they think about making decisions and solving problems, just the success they're going to have in the school system, which then translates into how they're going to do well in the work environment as well too. We know that kids who experience trauma during childhood are even more impulsive than the normal adolescent, and they engage in problem behaviors at higher rates, right? And which makes it more likely that they're going to come to the attention of the system and find their way into the programs that we're involved with. And then we know that they struggle with interpersonal relationships and emotional intelligence, which means that they may need more guidance to help them navigate some of those situations, to be able to work in a setting where they can handle their emotions without losing their job. So how is this relevant for our programs, right? So we absolutely want to make sure that mentors understand adolescent development. It's interesting that people will often say, oh, I remember when I was a kid. But really, it's about taking it a step further, right? Understanding what normal adolescent development looks like, and how oftentimes some of the behaviors that we find frustrating or troubling are really part of normal adolescent development. So helping them really, really understand that, but giving them tools to meet the kids where they're at, so that they know how to work with somebody who's 13 or 14 or 17, wherever the kids are at, that they understand what's going to be normal, what's going to be appropriate, what can be expected of them, and we want to think about. So I want to kind of challenge everyone to think about their own programs, whether you feel like your program, could be characterized as developmentally appropriate. So as we go through today, in terms of talking about, hopefully I'll give you some things to think about, things you might want to incorporate, things you might want to emphasize even more than you're doing, right? Because you realize that you're doing some things that are just right on and smart. So here's, I like to point out things that you can go looking for and to spend time with after today. So this is a great new resource that's recently published. Lawrence Steinberg has done a lot of work on adolescent development, and a brand new book out, Age of Opportunity, Lessons from the New Science of Adolescence. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of what I think are some of the highlights of the book, but I highly recommend that you get this. And it's written for people who work with kids to help them think about how do we apply this, and now that we know this, what's important. So here's some of what he says, some of the points that he brings out. So one of the things that he talks about in there is, I think, really important to think about is that adolescence lasts longer now than it ever has previously, ever in history, right? We know that for a variety of reasons, puberty starts earlier for many kids, especially kids that are going to find their way into the system where we're working, right? Kids who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, even more likely to experience adolescence earlier. And because of the way that our society is structured now, where people go from high school to college and then often are back living in the home of their families, and delaying the start of their own family and perhaps the start of a career, adolescence is just going longer, right? We know that along with this, we know that the brain develops, particularly, it's a little bit slower in men than women, but up until age 25, the brain is still going through the development. And so when we think about, the kind of reasoning and rationality that we want adults to have in our society, sometimes people just aren't capable of that until their mid-20s. So all of this to say that there's a longer period of adolescence, which is good and bad to that, right? So it gives them a longer time to really get things in place and figure out what they're going to do. But it also means that some of the behaviors, some of the thinking and the impulsivity that can be problematic, they're going to be capable or displaying some of those properties for even longer than we would hope to be the case. We also know, so science has shown us, and this is a bit of a new revelation, that there is, during adolescence, a heightened what they call brain plasticity, which means that we did think for a while that up until grade 3, age 8, maybe up to age 10, that kids had the capacity to really learn and their brain was really still developing. But by that time, once they got to fourth grade, they really were sort of past the point where they were going to be able to keep learning at that speed. So there was a lot of urgency to make sure that prior to that point, kids were, staying on track. They were learning how to read. They were doing things that would otherwise be, real trouble signs if they got past that. But the new science is showing us that when they get into adolescence, the brain becomes fertile again for, real growth and real change. And so it's really a time when we can continue to help shape the way that kids are thinking, feeling, making decisions. And so it's really important to think about what we do and how that can have an impact. And again, as I mentioned previously, the focus really needs to be on positive youth development, right? So we're not just focusing on avoiding problem behavior, but we're focusing on helping them develop self-regulation, right? So it's not about surviving, but it's about helping them figure out how they're going to thrive, how they're going to do well, really excel at the things that they want to. Right, and so we're going to talk more about self-regulation. A couple other things about the adolescent brain. So we know that the adolescent brain is particularly sensitive to influences in their environment, which involves the people that they're around, sort of the things that are stimulating to them. At no other time, once you get past adolescence, at no other time is the brain as attuned to those kinds of influences and stimuli, and we see that in lots of ways. So it's interesting. One of the things that he talks about in the book is that we remember things so vividly from our adolescence, not even necessarily things that were like critically important moments in our life, but because our senses were so tuned in, we remember things that happened to us as adolescents vividly. But that also means that at the time that they're going through those, they're susceptible to being overly emotional, to making things seem much bigger than somebody 10 years older than them would. And so that's good to keep in mind. We know that under certain situations, judgment is just going to be impaired. So kids are less likely to display good judgment if they're experiencing stress, particularly high levels of stress, if they're fatigued, right? So they're not getting enough sleep, so they're not getting enough rest, and so they're fatigued, and in groups with teenagers. And that's another one that's pretty interesting. So we talk about peer pressure, but the research really suggests that it's not really about pressure, it's really just about the influence of being around other kids. So take a look at this chart here. So what this is showing, this is, we're looking at how involved people are with risky driving, So the white bars are when the person is driving by themselves. The black bars are when they're driving with a group of people in their car, right? And so typically those people are, the same age or part of their family, right? But so look what we see. For adults, that's the 2 bars all the way over to the right side of the chart. Right? It doesn't really matter if they're by themselves or with a group. They tend, and below the line there, they're not really engaged in risky driving, right? It doesn't seem to matter very much. For young adults, a little more likely to be engaged in risky driving if they have a group of people with them. But look for adolescents, right? Just having other people with them, probably kids with them, much more likely to engage in risky driving. So one of the things we're learning really is that kids driving with other kids, one of the most dangerous activities that they can be involved in terms of the just the physical consequences. So the focus really is about helping them develop their skills at self-regulation, which is, so self-control is another way that we talk about this. But those really are the skills that we can be focused on, we should be focused on trying to really develop, encourage the development of while they're an adolescent. So some of the ways that kids get better at self-regulation, being able to practice it, just being able to practice it, practice, right? So putting them in situations, having, with their mentor, talking through situations where they really reflect on, what could you have done differently in that situation, right? What should you have done? What would have been a better response, right? Thinking about that, practicing, being in situations where there's some adult supervision, and then they can continue to reflect on how they're doing. Organized sports is another way where they just develop those skills. Some specific exercises that we're learning that you might encourage kids to be involved in might even be activities that kids can do with their mentors. Meditation, mindfulness meditation, yoga, taekwondo, other kinds of similar, karate, judo, those kinds of activities. Really, really good in terms of helping to develop self-regulation skills. Here's another resource that I want to kind of direct your attention to. This one's been out for a while. It's called Ready or Not, Here Life Comes. It's aimed at educators, but I really think that it's relevant to the work that we do with kids, and I think you find lots of great examples. And what I really like about this book is it provides really concrete examples in how do we help people get ready to be an adult in our society, right? So it's, for many of our kids, it'd be great if they went back to school, stayed in school, graduated from high school, went to college, but for many of them, that's not going to be the trajectory, right? Not going to go like that at least in the short run. But they do need to be able to support themselves, support a family as adults, and this just really helps them think about that. And it grew out of a realization that even when kids did all the things we told them, right, they did well in high school, they got into college, they got a college degree. If the job they got after college wasn't the one, that it wasn't really what they wanted to do, there was no backup plan, right? We don't help people be prepared with a backup plan, and we have a whole generation really in crisis as a result of that, according to Dr. Levine, who wrote the book. So the book is really is geared at helping people get prepared for what's to come, and to be ready to be flexible too when they need to be. So he refers to this as life prep. It's really focused on what's the adult world like, what is the modern workplace all about, right? What do you need to be successful in a modern workplace, right? It's not the same as our grandfathers' work that they did, where they just showed up and they followed instructions and they got paid, right? That's not really what the modern workplace is about. And so what are the skills and knowledge that are going to be required to be competent on those jobs? And again, this is about fostering their work-life readiness.
Sorry.
So there's really two aspects here. Question? Really two aspects here of life prep. So one is targeted mind growth. So we use activities, we use tasks, we use projects, case studies that are relevant to what's being taught. So it's a much more interactive way of learning, right? So if you want to teach somebody how to do something, think about how you can use activities, how you can have projects, case studies, right? Help them think about other examples that they may know of, so that they can develop what we call targeted mind growth. Mind studies is another, the other aspect here. So where we offer specific ways to learn, courses, workshops that teach specific growth processes. So and that's really about helping kids understand how they're going to get from where they are now to where they aspire to be. So these are specific cognitive skills that that you would help them learn how to do critical thinking, how to introduce themselves, how to speak in public, how to get along with other people, those kinds of things that become really important. If you can get a hold of a copy of the book, I mean, you can pretty easily get used copies of this book for a very good price. You'll see lists of those growth processes. And so here's, under targeted mind growth, we use case histories to explore skills. So if you want to help kids learn how to make decisions or solve problems, right? One way is for them to learn through trial and error, right? But that can be a slow process. Some people are slower learners than others, right? But you can also help them learn by looking at other people's lives too. So they may see an example in their mentor. They may have other adults in their life that are good at this that they can learn from as well. But you can help them think about other case histories, right? Think about people that they know. Movies are a great way to do this, right? So if a mentor and a young person go to a movie, they could talk, become a way to talk about, what do you think about the choices that person made, right? Is that what you would have done? What, could you have done something different? So, I often think of think about the Tukey Williams, who, as a young man was involved in, the establishment of some gangs that became notorious for their violence. And then he was involved himself in the death of other people, and then he ended up ultimately on death row for the murders of some people. And then once he got on death row, he transformed himself, right? And he became somebody who, was a role model, right? And at one point, he was streaming, classes to kids in elementary school about avoiding violence, right? Not making some of the decisions that he made. And there's been a movie out, Redemption, that was pretty popular that kids may know about. There's lots of ways that you can get access to, stories about his life that it's a great example. Helping kids really think about how they think, right? So thinking from the perspective of, what's going on? Why did you think that way? Why did you think that was going to be a good way to do this? What did you learn from this, right? So building those critical thinking skills. Teaching brain functions, right? And it's important for them to understand what those brain functions are and be able to label them, right? So when kids can say, invariably when you go for a job interview, they ask you, what are you good at? What are your strengths, right? And the first time most of us get asked that question, we're not prepared for it. It's like it's a question that side, and you're like, you're trying to think of something. But so if you can help them, and you can help them learn, right? So explain the function, teach the name for the function, offer chances to practice and strengthen the functions, right? If they can say, I'm good at setting priorities, I'm good at, solving problems, I'm good at making decisions, right? Those are words that people are going to listen to them and hear them say that, and that they're going to be interested in, in them because of that. So helping them really learn those brain functions and being able to use the labels so that they can sell themselves when they need to. If we think about what employers would like, they really want people that are strong in their communication skills, verbal and written. They want people that are going to be honest and have integrity, right? They want people that can work together on teams, that are strong in their interpersonal skills, and that bring a strong work ethic, right? How do we develop a work ethic? If you think about, some of these kids live in homes, in neighborhoods, in communities where they don't even really know adults that work for a living, right? So people haven't shown them that, regardless of how you feel when you get up in the morning, you show up for work. If that's your job, if you're getting paid, you go to work, you show up. And those seem like basic things, but when you don't know, when that's not part of your work ethic, you don't get to keep jobs. People don't want to hire people that don't have strong work ethic. So think about, if we think about this list here, right? How can you have influence here? How can your mentors have influence? What are ways that you can structure the way that you do programming, that you're helping them develop these skills, right? Develop strengths in these areas where they are somebody that can say, I'm a person of, integrity, and it's true. I work well on a team, and it's right. And employers will tell us that your average college graduate is not strong in any of these areas, right? It's a source of major frustration for employers. So you can give your kids a leg up by helping them become strong in each of these areas. So here's another, this is the last one I'm going to share with you today, another important resource. This is a book that came from the National Academy of Sciences that looking at how we can reform juvenile justice so that it is itself a developmental approach. Here's the link to get this book. You can download it for free from the National Academy of Sciences website, and yeah, it's just a really nice resource. But I'll talk a little bit about what some of the highlights are from this as well. So this was a committee that was assessing juvenile justice reform, and they issued the report in 2013, and they really said that the goal of the juvenile justice system should be to support the pro-social development of kids who are involved in the justice system, while at the same time making sure that we're protecting public safety, right? But that's a revolutionary thought, right? If you look back historically, the juvenile justice system was really got into a point where it was focused on public safety, right, and punishment, but really the goal for the kids coming out of the juvenile justice system should be the same as the goal for kids coming out of our public education system, right? And all child serving agencies. It's really about their pro-social development. So how do we structure the juvenile justice system to make sure that that even happens? So here's some goals here, and I took this is a quote that comes right out of the report, right? So and this is based on what we know about adolescent development research, right? So the goal of the juvenile justice reforms should be that we're holding kids accountable for what they did wrong, and they're accepting responsibility in a process that they think is fair, right? They believe that the way they're being treated by the system is fair. And when kids see the system and the process is fair, that promotes their healthy moral development and legal socialization, right? They learn how to be a positive member of our society when they feel like they're being treated fairly. If they feel like they're not being treated fairly, then that reinforces their social disaffection, right, and antisocial behavior, right? If I don't feel like I'm being treated well by the system, then forget them, right? I'm gonna do what I want, right? Why should I be good when they don't care about me, right? When I'm being treated unfairly. And one of the things we know about kids that get into the juvenile justice system is that when they look around their own natural environment, there's lots of harm that they see going on, right? They themselves may be a victim of child abuse, right? And they didn't see adults get punished in the way that they see themselves get punished. And that's really hard for them to reconcile. How is this fair, right? And many kids see injustice in the way that the juvenile justice system is implemented. And so as providers of mentoring services, this is one of the ways that we can try to help, is help kids really see that it's important for them to own up to what they did, right? Be responsible for what they did, take accountability, talk about how they're going to make things better in the future, come up with a plan, right? That's about accountability, right? Accountability is not punishment. Accountability is stepping up and saying, I did something wrong. I caused some harm. Here's what I did. Here's how people's lives were affected, and here's how I'm going to be different in the future. Here's how I'm going to be better. And so we want to make sure that we're not just implementing predominantly punitive policies and programs that don't foster positive development, pro-social development, right? Because then ultimately we're not reducing recidivism. And we know what happens, right? These kids end up cycling in and out of first the juvenile justice system, then the adult criminal justice system, maybe some of our mental health system as well. They probably have substance abuse disorders. And so, all of that comes with that. And so we have a chance as we first engage with these kids to make a difference, to make this an experience from which they can grow, right? And that enhances their adolescent development. So these are the hallmarks of a developmental approach in the juvenile justice system, right? So accountability without criminalization, right? So what that's saying is not that we wouldn't give them legal consequences, right? But we're not gonna move them into the adult system, right? We're gonna treat them with respect to their age, right? It's going to be important to us, right, that they're still a 16-year-old, even though they may have done something that an adult did, right? So the harm that was caused is not going to drive our response if we're talking about adolescents. We do want them to be accountable. We want them to appreciate and become transformed in terms of their identity, but we want that to happen within a developmental system, a juvenile justice system. We also want to think about what are some alternatives to the justice system involvement, right? We don't need to lock everybody up for them to learn from what they've done, right? There are ways that we can do this in community-based settings, maybe even do this in diversion settings where they're not even being adjudicated in the juvenile court. We want to make sure that our responses are individualized, and that comes from quality assessments, right? Validated assessments of risks and needs, so that we can treat these kids as individuals and meet them where they're at. If we have to resort to confinement, we would only do that when it's completely necessary for public safety. And that means we really have to be thoughtful about when is that absolutely necessary. And it really involves a genuine commitment to fairness. That's a tough one. That's really a tough one, because fairness oftentimes is in the eye of the receiver, right? The people that are being treated in a certain way are the ones that are going to decide if they were treated fairly. And so we have to think about, how do we do that? It also means we want to be sensitive to disparities in the way that kids are treated, right? And so so that means we really have to challenge ourselves. If we're seeing disparities, if certain group of kids are overrepresented in our systems and our programs, that tells us something about the way those kids are experiencing their place in our society, right? And the way in which they're being handled, and the kids who aren't there, the other groups of kids that are not there, what's happening with them? Because they're doing the same things, right? They're doing the same things. They're just being treated in different ways. And we really know that how important it is to engage the family. Engage the family, again, in ways that they are resources for the kids, and not just defined as part of the problem, if not the primary part of the problem, right? You've probably heard of the balanced and restorative justice approach, and this is popular over the last 20 years or so in the juvenile justice system. And I don't know very much about the state of Connecticut and whether this is something that they've adopted, but if it's not something that's already part, you might take a look. Again, I've given you the link here. The idea here is that we're going to help kids understand the impact of their behavior, right? The human impact. Who was harmed? How were they harmed? How are people's lives changed because of what they did, right? And then accept responsibility and own that they did this, right? The choices that they made and what they did, there was a direct connection to the harm that somebody else experienced. And we want them to express remorse. That's a really critical part of this, right? We want them to learn how to be remorseful, how to express remorse, right? How to say, I'm sorry for what I did. I feel bad for what I did. I feel bad that somebody experienced that harm. And then develop their own capacities, right? So that they can take action to repair the damage, right? Give them an opportunity. Restorative justice, focus on that. So, again, I don't know how prevalent that may be, in your state, in your communities, but, to the extent that we let kids, face, the people that they harmed and come together to decide on how the harm's going to be repaired, we know that that's a growth experience for kids. It's a transformational experience oftentimes. And along the way, then they develop their own capacities, right? And they can become more integrated, more fully a member of the community, right? They can become part of the solution, right? Not just a social problem. And so think about that and how that would fit in. All right, so if we think about what the goals are, right? So now I'm gonna bring us back to, okay, what does this mean for our programs and what do we want to do? So let's think about what the key developmental goals are, right? So when kids get out of their adolescence, become, adults, we can stick to thinking about it in terms of, when they're 18 years old, because that may be when kids are not formally involved in your programs anymore. We want them to have a positive identity. We want them to see themselves as somebody that they're impressed with, that they feel like is going to make a contribution to the world in a way that's positive. We want them to have a sense of agency. Sense of agency really refers to the way that they make choices, right? That they have a say in what happens to them, right? They're not just being shuffled through the system, and they're not just reacting to how other people act on them, but they also have they're going to make some decisions. They're going to have some aspirations. They're going to have goals. They're going to be able to really, have a sense of autonomy in the way that they, move towards a future that they want for themselves. And then finally, it's really important for them to have a commitment to the community. For those of you that were with us a couple weeks ago when I was there talking at the event, I talked to you a little bit about youth-led service projects. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's a great example of how we help kids accomplish these 3 goals, right? Where kids can, together, in groups, identify a problem, come up with a solution, figure out a way to address that, and then think about it, be in a position to reflect on how they made a difference in the lives of people that they touched through the project. Those are very powerful, and where you can help facilitate them with small grants that allow them to get materials or the supplies that they need in order to do cleanups or to paint things or to refurbish things. Those are ways that you can help facilitate that. And when kids can think about themselves as, they identified a problem, they came up with a solution, they found a way to implement it, and they were able to recognize how, they had an impact on people's lives. It does all the things that what we've been talking about today, right? In terms of, how they see themselves, right? It's a more positive identity. They see how they were an active participant in creating a solution, and they recognize the commitment they have to the community and how they're an important part of that community. All right, so the last thing that I want to bring your attention to is from the Search Institute. The Search Institute, you probably know, famous for the developmental assets, right? The free developmental assets. You've probably seen those before, and they've continued to evolve their work. And one of the latest things that they've done is what they call developmental relationships. Here's a link to a document that talks about the developmental relationships, and I'm going to show you on the next several slides what you'd see on that. But it's a great way to think about what a young person might say to a mentor. Here's what I need from you, right? So it's called the Developmental Relationships Framework. So I tried to blow this up so we could see this here. So this is written from the perspective of the young person, right? If this is a relationship that's going to be developmentally good for me, here's what I want. Number 1, and there are 5 categories here. I want someone that's going to express care, show that you like me and you want the best for me. And here's 5 ways that you could do that, right? Be present, pay attention when you're with me, be warm, let me know that you like being with me and you express positive feelings towards me. Invest, right? Commit time and energy to doing things for and with me. Show interest. Show me that it's a priority to you to understand who I am and what I care about, and then be dependable, someone I can count on and trust. So if you think about none of these things would be difficult for a mentor, right? So so I encourage you to share these with your mentors, build this into your training, right? This is what we're asking mentors to really focus on, right? And that they can work with the young people. The next aspect of the developmental relationships framework is challenging growth, right? And the young person would say, I want you to insist that I try to continuously improve, right? Inspire me, help me see future possibilities for myself. Make it clear that you want me to live up to my potential. Recognize that, get me to stretch, right? Recognize my thoughts and abilities while also pushing me to strengthen them. But also hold me accountable, right? So have boundaries, rules, put limits there as well, too. The next category is about providing support, right? Helping me complete tasks and achieve goals. And again, great strategies here: encouraging, guiding, modeling, advocating, stand up for me when I need it, right? Being there, praising my efforts. The next one is about sharing power. This is an important one, right? I don't know that we always encourage mentors to think about it from this perspective, but make sure the young person gets to bring their voice to it, right? Hear my voice, let me share in making decisions. Respect me, take me seriously. Give me, ask me for my opinions and consider them, when you're making decisions. Respond, understand and adjust to my needs, my interests, my abilities. And then collaborate. Let's work together to accomplish goals and solve problems, right? You're not just going to do things for me. You're going to help me learn how to do things so that I don't have to have a mentor to be okay. And then the last one is about expanding possibilities. And again, this is one that we often hear people talk about in terms of the benefits of mentoring, right? Helping kids think outside of their perhaps small worldview, right? I mean, their worldview may be as big as just their neighborhood, right? But we think about expanding their possibilities, expanding their horizons, connect me to opportunities, right? Help me explore, connect me to people who can help me grow, right? Help me build a community that's going to support me, you know, for the future, and then help me work through the barriers that might keep me from accomplishing my goals too, helping to navigate as well. So I show that to you. I encourage you to get go out to that link and grab that handout there so that you can take a look at that and really share that with your mentors and really help them think about and be reflective about the way that their own involvement, whether that relationship is what we would call, right, a developmentally appropriate relationship, a developmental relationship. And so with that, I mean, that's really the end of my my prepared remarks for today. So how about we open it up for questions? I'm going to turn it back over to Hannah and let her moderate this section.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roger, for everything. I'm going to open it back up first in a minute. Well, we did actually get one question, Roger, during your towards the end during the developmental aspects. Do you feel, or the question is that should this be an additional training for mentors? So say you have, you know, a 3-hour new mentor training, should you add this on, or would this be an advanced training for mentors so that they could learn more of the developmental aspects and how kind of what their role is in that?
It's a great question. I think it, yeah, I've often heard from mentors that sometimes they get too much training too early, right? They can't actually, you know, they're not going to retain it all, and they don't actually know how to apply it until they've been out working with their mentee for a little while, and then it sort of makes sense, right? So this might be one of those things that you share the handout with them at the training and get them to think about that, and then perhaps have a booster training afterwards where they come together and you can work through some actual situations, right? I would encourage you that if you do design a training around this, that you make it very interactive and tie it to situations, right? Get them to think about how would you handle this situation from this perspective, right? What could a mentor say that's about, you know, helping them, challenging their growth in under these circumstances, right? It's a great question.
Great, thank you. So I did open it up for question and answers. If anybody has one during the time, we have about maybe 2 or 3 minutes. You can submit a question on the chat or raise your hand by clicking on the face in the bottom right corner, which will include have you raise your hand. If you're called on to speak, I will make sure that you are unmuted on your phone or your computer. So if anybody has a question that we didn't receive during the conversation already. Roger, another question kind of regarding, mentor training and getting our mentors up and involved is, you talked about really, how their adolescent brain is. Is that another piece that you think we should talk more about in mentor training, or, just give an overview, for them at that time?
I think the more you can share, you probably don't want to have one that's just steeped in the science, right? But I think the more people understand about the brain development, right there, a great example is, we often train kids, we often teach kids things about, like, let's say, safe sex, right? So they learn lots of things about, sexually transmitted diseases and, how to use contraception. But in the situation, when they're faced with an opportunity to have sex, they oftentimes don't apply any of the things that they learn. It's not that they didn't learn, it's not that they couldn't teach it to somebody else, but it's not the way an adolescent thinks given the situation. And if they're in a situation where there are other peers around, they may behave in certain ways where they think that's the way they're supposed to behave in that situation, and they're not going to think responsibly, right? And so I think part of that is helping mentors get that that's just the nature of adolescence, right? And it's not as simple as I teach you something, therefore you apply this every time. And so I think it's just good to have and this is normal adolescence, right? I mean, this is not just the kids that come into our programs. This is going to be true for kids in general. It was probably true for the mentors when they were teenagers too.
Great. And Roger, we do have one additional question. It's how do we evaluate whether a focus on developmental is making a difference in our mentor and our mentee relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So I think, well, I think because in order to know if it's making a difference, there has to be a frame or a benchmark, right, that you're comparing it to. So I think if you adopted this and then you started to see, well, so let's see let's see what it would look like if it was making a difference. So I think you would see kids actually growing, right? You would see them achieving some of these developmental, milestones, right? You would see them start to exhibit more self-regulation. You would see them, exhibiting some of the social skills. So I'm doing a site visit today, evaluating a soccer program. It's a group mentoring program around soccer, and they were telling today how they see that kids grow over the time. Is that where they used to get hurt and they would really focus on being hurt. Now you don't see that as much. They've become better able to, as the coaches said, shake it off and keep going, and they see the kids helping each other, right? The kids helping each other, come on, get up, let me, let's go, and they saw that as growth in the kids that wouldn't have happened but for how they were working with the kids, from session after session after session, when they were out playing on the field. So that's an example.
That's great. Thank you so much, Roger. So I think we are done with the Q&A session right now, and I'm just going to remind everybody that our part 3 of our series is coming up in June. We would love for you to attend, and thank you again for your participation in today's webinar. This was in our series focusing on mentoring system-involved youth. If you have not registered for the last one, we encourage you to. You can register on our own website at preventionworksct.org. And we want to say thank you so much. Thank you to Roger for taking time out of his day to do the webinar with us from across the country. Please take a few moments to complete the evaluation form, which will appear on your screen. And then when you are done, please click End Session. If you have any questions, feel free to give Sandy Susie or myself a quick email or give us a call.